obligation to respect those lands. The lands in the East Campus on Atikameksheng and Wahnapitae peoples, and in the West Campus on the Fort William First Nations people. Please reflect on where you are as we go through this journey. Over to you, Dr. LeBlanc.
Congrats. Thank you, Dr. Verma. I'm really pleased to see all of you here in person and online. It's a really important day for us, and an important day for listening to some hard truths that will be shared. I'll give an overview of the agenda for the day. Had the great honor in the time that I've worked here at NOSM to get to know and work with Elder Tom Chisel, who is here with us today. He's a survivor from Pelican Falls School and works very closely with us with the Elder Circle, and you'll get to know him as you work here at NOSM as students, and I'm sure that many of you have crossed paths. So he's going to open up with some reflections. I had the great honor again of journeying to Algoma, the Shingwak residential school site, to sit with some leaders of the Children of Shingwak Survivors Association, and we have a pre-recorded a session with them. It is about 45 minutes long, and I encourage you to get some headphones, and we did work on boosting the volume, but it is very conversational, and I encourage you to engage with what they're saying both today and with you in your life. We do have an archive that we're building at NOSM University. There's a library guide, and past presentations are there, but we'll also put the full recording. So it is about an hour and a half long, and I want to honor that they were really happy to share with us their story and want this to be archived and used in that way. So please seek it out, and like I said, reference it back and make use of that guide. Also, for the rest of today, we did pull together a list of regional events, and we encourage you to stick around with us afterwards. We'll be here in the room in Thunder Bay as well as in Sudbury, and also encourage you to engage with community events. Following the presentation, we have a panel with Indigenous learners who are going to speak around their development as physicians, and really proud to welcome Chelsea Bezana, Dr. Melanie Rose Frappier, and Tara Wilson. So we'll hand it over to Tom, and again, thank you very much for joining us today.
I just like pushing buttons. Bonjour. My name is Tom Chisel, my English name, and in my Anishinaabe name is Uzawi Tung, and I belong to the Sturgeon clan, Name, and I also belong to a Medewan society. Bonjour. I was asked to talk about, traditional healing in the context of truth and reconciliation, and good thing. Sometimes I wonder what those words mean, because it's a broad. It can be very broad, the topic. But I just mentioned my experience with regards to healing and traditional healing, and so I am a survivor of the Pelican Falls Indian Residential School. I went there in 1962, and I left in 1968. I left early, 1 year earlier than I would have, because my brother had been boarding in Sulicout, and I went to visit him on a weekend. And the people that he was living with ended up requesting me in the following year, and I ended up escaping, so to speak, residential school. I got out a year earlier than normal. I would have probably stayed in residential school another year had they not requested I live with them. And my great grandfather also went to residential school in Shingwak, sometime in the 1800s, late 1800s. They escaped. Him and his brother, they stole a sailboat, and they made it to Lake Nipigon, or Nipigon River, east of here. I was told by my uncle that a spirit of a woman would appear at nighttime and would point the way, to steer that little sailboat that they had, and they made it there. And so they walked the railway tracks to Fort William First Nation, and then from there they paddled an old lady, a Kukum, who wanted to go and visit relatives at Lac de Mille, and so they met over there. And then from there they paddled with a group of people wanting to collect their treaty money at Denoric, which is up near Dryden. So they went along with those people, and they made it home. They made it home because people from Lac Seul found them there, and they were taken home from there. So anyway, my great grandfather was given his last Anishinaabe name of was Kichigamuni, which means Lake Superior man. But the Indian agent, when he became an adult and he wanted to register his name, that Indian agent said, "No, there's no Lake Superior here, and the biggest lake here is Lac Seul." So that's how the Lac Seul name came to be. My mother's name was Lac Seul. And so, and then also my father went to residential school in the 1940s, from 1940 to 45. And then all my siblings went in the 60s. So that's my experience with residential school, and my family's experience. And one of the things that my father told me when I got into high school was, he told me, "Don't ever forget that you're Anishinaabe," he told me, in my language. He said to me. And so when I was I was in high school, I used to wonder, what is it? Why am I? What difference is there? I dress like a white person. I speak the language. Then I began to realize I still had my language. I still could speak a little bit of my language, even though I'd started to lose it because I was going to school all the time, spending less and less time at home. In fact, I think I only lived with my family up to the first 6 years, and then only 6 years after that, not even 2 years after that, when I think about it, 2 months out of every year, going home after residential school. So then when I got out of high school. So I really, when I think about why I am here, it's because I listened to my father, and because I guess in some kind of an unconscious way, I started to follow what he was saying, and I started to look for elders and teachers and Shnabek, and so and I became very connected with people in Thunder Bay because I ended up living here for a while, and I ended up with the Lyon family here. I married Dr. Richard Lyon's daughter. Anyway, that's a different story. But the connection, the connection to Anishinaabe all through my younger days, and then meeting lots and lots of elders throughout the time that I, traveling around in my area, and then traveling farther north, like up into the flying communities. I got to meet the Chief Thomas Fiddler, the old Thomas Fiddler. I was so amazed sitting. I'm sitting with this old man that he's talking about history of our people way up north, like back when the Europeans arrived and things like that. It's like I was just like I was listening to an old historian, and and I really feel lucky that I met him and had that connection to the north. And and then I met his grandson, who became my teacher, who gave me the sweat lodge ceremony, and then his father-in-law gave me songs. He was a song collector, or he just knew hundreds and hundreds of Anishinaabe songs, and his name was Walter Red Sky. And I met him when I was still in high school. He was singing with a hand drum at the Friendship Center in Solacott, and he was singing. Years later, when I went to go and get my the Sweat Lodge songs from him, when I gave him tobacco, it dawned on me, hey, were you that guy that sang at the Friendship Center? And he said, were you that kid that listened to me that night? And I was like, wow, it's like, it was so, and he was so happy to see me again. And I remember, just finally clicked. It was so neat to have met him, and he became my mentor. He was the one that guided me into the Mideon Society. He said, I've taught you everything that I can teach you. He said, now, if you want to learn more, you'll have to join Mideon, he said. And Mideon is our medicine society, Anishinaabe Medicine Society. And so so that's where I started to learn about plant medicines, and it's all the stuff around Anishinaabe medicine. And so today I work at the Sulakot First Nations Health Authority as a traditional healing coordinator. That's the title. I'm only one person that's doing the traditional healing in that organization, essentially. So I do everything, coordinating, plus also doing the ceremonies and all the medicine, healing, and all that stuff. So today, when I think about being a part of the university here in this medical school, I've been here, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years. I can't remember now. I don't keep track of years. I don't like to, because I get grayer and grayer each time I start to look back. In fact, I looked at a picture of myself when I was I used to actually I was a traditional dancer, and I had my outfit on, and my hair was black, and I was like, oh, that's a long time ago, it seems. But anyway, with truth and reconciliation, I've spoken to so many elders and healers and people who practice our Anishinaabe spirituality and the healings and the ceremonies, the ceremonial healings, the really spiritual healings that we do, those have kind of become almost like an alternative, when a long time ago that was the way it was, and it became, we became underneath the Western Medicine Society, and so what needs to happen, I believe, is that somehow or other our ways need to be revived, restored, and made so that Anishinaabe can go to a healer and get the healing they want. And whatever kind of healing it is, if it's herbal medicines, if it's spiritual type medicines, if it's psychological, in essence, a traditional healer is everything, he's holistic, So we talk about our mind, the stuff that affects our minds, and and also the way we eat, the things we eat, the importance of eating properly, and then following traditional Anishinaabe healing ways, or spirituality that helps to heal the body, helps heal our minds and our spirits and body. And this is what I've been really just last week or this past week or this couple of days, we sat with elders and healers, and also we had a Western doctor, a Anishinaabe, a Cree doctor, who's a doctor, medical doctor, and he talks about this, how really it is so important that we need to begin to restore the Anishinaabe spirituality. And so, and I totally, when he was doing his presentation, and I just kind of like, it's like you see it, like I see it and I've seen it, and wow, really, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I wish there was hundreds of Anishinaabe doctors who could say, yeah, let's do this. And so I'm really, today I'm feeling that one day we will have that, and I hope I'm around when that happens. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. So miigwech, it's miigwech. Aho.
Jimmy Gretsch, Tom. So I'm going to listen to Jackie Fletcher and Shirley Horn.
So I'm just going to get into what I want to talk about, right?
Sure, yeah, go for it, yeah.
Okay, my name is Jackie Fletcher. I went to Shingwak Residential School here in 1959 to 61, and then I was into a boarding home after that until 64, which the government never recognized. They don't say that as an issue, but they only paid me for the 2 years I was here at Shingwak. I'm the vice president of the Children of Shingwak Alumni Association, and we've been working at this since 1981. Volunteer, and our organization is going gung-ho right now. It always has been, yeah. Okay, what I want to talk about is my emergency experience by ambulance at the Sioux Area Hospital this year in June. I had a trip to the emergency room because I had COVID. And during that time, I experienced many of the same things that happened to me when I was dropped out here at the Shingwak Indian Residential School. I experienced abandonment, authoritative tone, loneliness, confusion, fear, loss of control. I didn't realize until I got home and started thinking about what happened to me, that those were triggers that happened to me. And on many levels. And what I mean by that is, when they took me in the ambulance, I was by myself, no family members or nothing, just with a stranger. And that kind of freaked me out, but I'm so sick, I didn't really think about it. And I got to the hospital, I was alone in an isolated room, and they kept closing the door, and I said, could you leave it open? No, you're in my isolation. But the next nurse come on, she would open it a little bit for me. So it all depends on who you talk to. Mm-hmm. The nurses, some of the nurses were annoyed because I used the buzzer. You know how they give you that buzzer by your bed? She came in and she says, why are you ringing that so much? I said, I need to go to the washroom. Well, she said, there's other people who have needs in this hospital too. I said, well, why did you give me the buzzer in the first place? Mm-hmm. I was so annoyed with her. She had a condescending attitude, the way she was speaking to me. And the doctor forgot about putting me on He had an order going to be put into the computer to give me something to help me sleep because I haven't slept in 2 nights. And he forgot about it. I went to the hospital at 11:30 that night. I never seen that doctor till 5 o'clock in the morning. And then he forgot about what he was supposed to put in the computer. The nurse had to chase him down, and then he came back after 2 hours later and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot to put that in the computer." That's all he said. After the shift changed, the nurse repeated all the procedures that happened to me when I first went in. You know, they put those things all over your body. I don't know what they're called, electrodes of some sort. Well, before the nurse left on the first shift, she pulled all that off me. Then the next nurse come on, put it all back on again. It was like, why are you doing that? You know, I don't feel well. Why are you bothering me like that? They took blood pressure constantly. I don't know what numbers they were using, but that thing was going off every 5 minutes. I was trying to sleep and it hurt my arm. And every time I dozed off, that thing would start up again. And it would make a loud noise. And finally, I said to the nurse, "You need to take this off of me because I don't know what you're doing with this. Can't you just use one number? Do you have to have 50 numbers?" They really didn't know what to do with me because I didn't have the classic symptoms of COVID. I wasn't coughing. I didn't have a fever. I didn't, you know, any of the symptoms. I didn't have it. And so the first doctor that forgot about putting that thing in the computer said to me, "I'm sending you in a specialist to deal with COVID." So that doctor came in, talked to me a little bit, and he said, "I'm going to issue you a prescription for a puffer." And I said, "Why? I don't have no problem with my breathing." "Well, just take it for 2 days. If you don't need it, then don't worry about it." Like, this totally confused me. That's what I'm saying. They didn't know what to do with me. So I was there from 11 till 2:30 the next day, 11 p.m. that night till 2:30 the next day. I was so thirsty, I asked for water or ice chips several times when I first went in. They finally gave me some at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was such a soothing thing. There was no conversation. It was just, if I asked for something, then they'd bring something to me. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep because of that blood pressure cuff. And I needed to go to the bathroom, so I pressed the buzzer a couple of times. And when the nurse came to speak to me, she spoke to me in a condescending manner. I told you about it. Why are you pressing that buzzer so much? I said, "I have to go to the bathroom." So she finally brought in a paper bedpan. And I know they look like a little hat. And I said, "I'm going to overflow that because I haven't gone to the bathroom for hours." "Oh, don't worry about it," she said. "We can always change the bedding." So she put it under me, and of course, all over the place. 3 hours later, I had to go to the bathroom again, and she brought that same thing in again. And the same thing happened again. Finally, they brought in a commode. They finally got it, that I know what I was talking about, that I knew how much I was going to go to the bathroom. And all the while, they were asking me questions that I can't even remember how I would answer them because I was so sick. And my bed faced a huge clock like that. So that's all I could see was that big clock waiting for the doctor to come. And the lights were so bright in there. So during our residential school gathering that we had this July, I did the welcoming address to all the people that came. And during that time, I explained to them about what happened to me at the hospital, because I felt it was important for people to know. And after I was done, the chancellor of the university came over to me and said, "I want to hear your story. I want your story. Could you write it down for me?" So I said, "Yes." So I sent it to him. And it wasn't long before I received a call from the Quality and Risk Management Department of the hospital with an apology. The complaint has gone to the appropriate leader, she said, and I'm presently waiting to hear back from them. I don't know what appropriate leaders mean, but I haven't heard back at this point. And I made some suggestions to her. I said, why don't you ask patients to do a survey of their experience? And she said that they randomly send this out. I've never ever gotten one. I don't know if anybody has ever gotten one. I told her to recommend that the staff educate themselves on the residential school era, as we have an archive center tours of residential school history. And speakers can be brought in, like Shirley and I are here. We could go in and talk to medical people about our experiences in residential school. The rep also who called me says that the leaders and herself have received Indigenous sensitivity training. And I told her the frontline workers need it more. They're the ones that deal with patients as they come in and out. I also suggested that they set up a volunteer support to sit with patients and be their voice if possible. Because I had nobody to talk to. I was in pain and I didn't want to bother them because of that buzzer. I'm getting emotional now. The message I would like to pass on today to you that are becoming doctors is listen to the patient carefully. Develop a relationship with them. They know their own body and they're the only ones who can talk about what is going on, but if they're cut off like that, you can't talk. I spoke to a cousin about my experience and she's on dialysis now and she said her doctor told her, you're a real pain in the ass. This is the kind of stuff that's going on. Please don't dismiss what the patient is telling you. Engage in the conversation and ask open-ended questions. That's what I'm suggesting that the doctors do. In comparison, I just had eye surgery on Friday at the same hospital, and it was a totally different experience with the doctor and nurse. She was taking care of my physical needs by asking me repeatedly, how am I doing? Do you need anything? Would you like a drink? And she occasionally held my hand. And the doctor constantly told me step by step what he was doing when he was working on my eye. What a different, totally different experience. And that's what I wanted to relate to people today.
Good. Thank you so much, Jackie.
You're welcome.
I think about the word kindness as you're speaking. And then that's one of the things that we're hoping to promote in this, what we call the Respect the Difference campaign that Awesome University is championing and asking for people to, respect the differences in people, but also walk with kindness.
For sure. You need, when you're sick like that, you need somebody to calm you down and be on your side, not, be against you or giving you a hard time.
That's very interesting, because my experience was totally different, but it wasn't, and I think that it was because of the emergency. My experience was a scheduled one, but hers, when she went in, there was emergency because she went at night, So you have people in there, you don't know if they're being run off their feet or whatever, so you're entering in a whole different atmosphere.
Yeah.
And, if they know that, if, students and programs know that, they can adjust to that, because if they've never been told, then they are not able to figure out the way that to handle the patient. Yeah, because my emergency, not my emergency, but my surgery was scheduled. I had a hip replacement, which is pretty traumatic, but I had no problems with it. I didn't get any stress. I was fully supported with that. So there's that different atmosphere.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because often there's a pattern of sort of blaming the system. And, you know, in large part, it's interpersonal interactions. It's how you speak to a person,
Right,
how you treat
exactly.
a person. So I think the evidence that, you know, sometimes there's experiences that are kind and respectful and
Right.
help, and sometimes there aren't, is an indication that, yes, the system is involved, but in those instances, it's very much the choice of the language, the tone, the, you know, the approach.
Exactly.
In an
So the
interpersonal
training
way.
has to reflect that, because I hope there's like, useful information for.
Sensitivity training.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, I'm Shirley Horn, I've been, I spent time in Shinwalk Residential School. I came in here when I was 7 years old, but I'd been to another residential school before that, the one in Chapel that they had. So I was 5 when I went there, but I was very young when I came here. And parents being nourished that way. And so I missed out on all of that. And it's almost came to a point when I had to do that for myself. I remember I would give myself talking to, you know, don't be feeling sorry for yourself and things like that. But that's another story. I had a desire to come back and help my community because we didn't have an established community. We were taken from our land, moved off the land and so on. And that's quite a long story. But our struggle as Cincinnati Cree people was that we never had that feeling of belonging to where we were because we weren't on our land. So for me, that was caused a lot of emotional trauma, which took years and years and years to deal with those things, because you deal with them as they come up. And that's what I did. And I think I was pretty successful in that. I don't know 100% though, because I wasn't triggered in other areas. I guess it's for me to be able to get through that without having a lot of medical problems or anything. I did have the emotional problems, but it didn't seem to be important at that time to the people who were looking after you, like within the residential school, or even in your own community when you went home, or the place you grew up wasn't my actual home, but in that community. The Native people at that time were struggling with very, very difficult issues, and mostly having to do with very extreme trauma, with the children going back and forth from school and so on, being removed from the family. And we never ever got any services for that. You know, you were just told to put that behind you and go get yourself a job or whatever to fit in with life as is known. That's why I think we need a lot of help in our communities to provide those kinds of services. Just the basics of those services, you know, what do you need in your life? You need some support, some help to deal with your trauma, and that should be provided even up to today, because children and young people have a lot of issues today in today's world with the very ease of access of alcohol, drugs, all those kinds of things. And people within the community don't necessarily have a strong grounding in their own community because of the residential school. That takes the whole process of your life after you leave the school, try and shape your life so that you're going to be able to deal with all of those things that you were that was done to you. I don't speak any of my language because it never was taught. So, you know.
One of the things that we try to help people understand is that the TRC looked largely at the residential school experience.
Yeah.
And there are other truths that need to be told as well. We touched on it a little bit, displacement from your home territory
Yes.
and the fight that's happened to try to restore some of that. So I'm curious if you have other thoughts on, you know, truths around land and food, traditional food, other things that might be of interest to the.
Well, when I look at the work we're doing here at Children of Shingwalk Alumni Association, and the dream that Chief Shingwalk had was to share, learn, and heal. When he said sharing the education, like we have to learn what the colonizers were bringing, but I really believe he meant they should be learning from us as well. And that always sticks with me, that it's not to be a one-sided.
Like the understanding of the trees as well.
Yeah.
It's all one-sided.
Yeah. If there's a privilege as to whose knowledge was supposed to be taken in or shared or valued.
Well, the whole,
Well, we found out in Mushkegowuk territory, which is Miss Natty Creek's part of Mushkegowuk, that when the treaty was signed, there was a taken up clause that was put in after the treaty was signed. And it was to say to the government have the ability to go and take you off your land if they needed it for railway or mining or whatever.
that's what they did. It was, in our case, they created the
Crown Game
Crown Game Preserve after they sent the native people in to trap all the beavers and the furs to send it back to England. And then all of a sudden they said, oh my God, we're going to wipe out the beaver. Those Indians are going to wipe out the beaver. Excuse me, they wanted those. So they decided, without informing the people that were using that land for sustenance, to that they were going to create a Crown Game Preserve. As a matter of fact, it's the biggest one in the world. Well, our people weren't allowed to hunt.
They became criminals overnight.
And they weren't allowed to trap. I don't even think at that point in time they were allowed to fish in there. They're allowed to fish in there now. We are, in our First Nation, we're allowed to do all the things that we couldn't do before. But that just happened because the Bissanabi and Cree were the ones that took that to court.
Yeah.
And we got that along with the Chapleau First Nation. We challenged them on that. And so we had things change. And within, also Billy was building himself a cabin. And they tried to kick him off the land as well. It took 6 years in court and they threw it out of court because they didn't have a leg to stand on and being able to remove him from the land. Unfortunately, he didn't finish his cabin because he just got too old to do it, you know. But those are the kinds of things that are always coming forward. You're discovering these things as you move forward. You run into more and more blockades. And we had, as Miss Natty Cree, had to work against those without money because we hadn't got our settlement. We hadn't got our reserve at that time, and we hadn't got our settlement for monies that we could use as First Nation. We had to know that every First Nation gets a pot of money every year to look after their roads and housing, health, care, education, all of those things. We didn't get a cent for that. So it was so difficult. And we wonder nowadays, because we almost lost that. I think we lost a couple of generations out there that no longer have that, tied to the land or are able to understand the importance of being on and how you can live a sustainable life by having your own. And that's not only physical sustainability, but emotional sustainability as well, because you have a home, you know, your roots are there. Like we lost a lot of stories from our older people, and we lost a lot of that experience. We're still handing over the skills of you know, looking after yourself, hunting, fishing, taking care of that food, knowing how much you got to provide or get for your winter, for over winter, your wood, cutting your wood and getting all that in.
Talking about truth and bringing it back to the residential school. That's why we work so hard at it. We've been at it since 1981. We want to tell the truth from our side, how it happened. We're the ones that experienced it, we lived it. We know what went on. And we're telling it through the hallways with our art and having reunions and just, we're getting sculptures done right now, how our people weren't allowed to talk to each other, and it's just amazing the sculpture that's happened. It's just happening outside here. We're telling the truth about our children who were drowned in a lake, and there's no record of them.
We can't even find out their names.
So we're setting up a memorial at that park now.
With the help of the city is doing most of the work and paying for that. But it took us to say, hey, why isn't there names of those people there? So that didn't stop them. We went up to the Wawa.
Well, we're still working with a lawyer trying to get the names from the government, the different departments. They keep hedging and they tell you, well, we can't do this because of Privacy Act and all the stuff, but it's not true. So then the other thing we're doing is working with where the girls' school used to be on Great Northern Road by the Legion, where you drive by there and there's a memorial up there and you don't even know it's there because it's just so, it just fits right in with the city. And, you know, you drive by and it looks like it's just another piece of the city. But we've worked with the Legion and we're going to have that enhanced so that it's going to be beautiful when we're done.
And it'll be a point of interest. People will stop and say, well, what's this? It'll look like a little park here. And we've got a lot of information plaques that are going to be out there.
So that's how we're telling the truth. We want people to know what happened.
What else are we doing?
Oh, there's so much more.
Right, we got involved in.
We're in the Zoom meetings every day and
Yeah. And the story is the important thing. The story, and we have the best archives in the world.
and we want people to know
And
that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, tell me a little bit. We had a few moments here in the archives as well as in the hallway. It's really amazing to see, like you say, the art and the photos and, you know, there's photos of
Have you
both of
seen
you.
it up on the second floor?
Yeah, we came in that floor and looked around and come down here and it really is,
Did you
very.
see Jackie and me up
I
there?
did. I saw both of you up there,
Yeah.
and other children, and you know, it's really amazing, and I'm curious if you can, you know, share a little bit about what that feels like. We're in the space that was the school, and this is
Yeah,
now
exactly.
these artifacts and other elements are here.
Well, that's where we worked so hard to get that done. We put in proposals and you know, getting specialists come in. A lot of people are doing work with us pro bono because they believe in what we're talking about. And, the archive, it's been filled by students themselves providing pictures and artifacts and things that they did when they were here.
We had a little trailer that was set up for us behind the university. That's where we started, in that little trailer. And then we'd come together and we'd have reunions, and through the help of other people, which I'm ever grateful for. Then there are people out there who thought it was important enough to do something about it. And one of the professors helped us so much to get going and
Should be able to
and,
see it.
start to build those archives
A normal person
And it
would see it at
started by
20
people
feet,
just
but you
bringing
can
their
see
photographs
double that.
that they have.
Or like,
telling their
they should be
story,
able to, sorry, they should be able
you
to see
know,
it at
and,
10 feet, but you can see it at 20 feet.
If they had some artifacts that they had, one of the boys did carvings and they have that, you know, and maybe some needlework, beadwork.
Like it'd be like
whatever.
2015.
So those
2010,
part of that, there's a lot
basically,
of
you can see
records
further
in there
back
too.
than most people would.
Can everybody mute their,
My family has glasses, so
So do we. Like, so do mine.
yeah. So I'm waiting for the day.
you got it? Thank you.
Not only at Shingwalk, but the other schools.
Other schools as well.
But there's been people come up and sat down and went through those binders with pictures. And then this one gentleman said, "That's my aunt. I didn't even know she went to residential school." You know, those kinds of stories that are coming out. We hope, there's a new part of this whole thing that's being built. It's gonna be called Makwa-Wakayagan. It's called Bear Home. And, it's gonna be a place for culture, and we're gonna be able to display a lot more than what we can in this little room here.
And we have won a number of awards.
Oh, yes.
It's like they're starting to cover the wall, and we're really happy about that because it authenticates what we're talking about. And it's not only for the native people to see, but it's for the settlers and everybody else. People who are visitors coming to this country and traveling around, they're able to link into that and hear the story. There's actual binders that they can pull out and look at all the pictures and read those things about the different families.
And there's tours that go on here all year round. So you go through that place where you walk through the auditorium, then you go into archives, and you go to the church, and you go to the cemetery, and you're being told all the time what's all here. And, we've got so much to tell.
So the archives are accessible to the general public?
Oh, yes.
People
Oh,
wanna.
yeah.
University
some more
students coming here all the time,
amazing.
doing research.
Before COVID, I think that's when we had the most students. How many?
We had 20,000 come through here on average in a year in the last 4 years.
And when we get other things finished, there's gonna be way more than 20,000 people that come through here. So that chapel that's over there, that was built by students. That the boys that were here at that time, it used to be called Shingwalk Industrial School, right?
Yeah.
Used to be called the Industrial School. And they had all boys here. The girls were up in Walden. They built. But they were shown how to put those stones in place. They did all the making of the benches and all of that stuff, that wooden stuff, other than, I don't think they made the altar or anything like that, but the structure of the church was made by those boys. And so when we look at the projects we're on now by honoring and remembering all of those children that were here.
There's a rock just outside here. I don't know if it's, but it's down this way. It's called the Crying Rock. And that's where the kids from Quebec side used to go up there and crying on each other's shoulder, right?
Mhm.
And, the plant manager here one time was gonna have that removed, didn't realize the significance of it.
Mhm.
And we all jumped on, no, you can't. So now it's gonna be another memorial put up there.
A little garden around it and so on. And the fact that during one of our gatherings, someone donated the money for us to do it. Got $100,000 for looking after that, taking care of making that monument up there. And we're using, government funds from the government to do the region, we're up at doing the enhancement of that. So, and the city's taking care. What we're doing right now is pushing all those buttons, sharing with the city, sharing with different groups about what our aim is. And, you know, they've been really accepted especially in this community.
Well, it's seen as their window of opportunity to get involved in truth and reconciliation. So a lot of them are coming forward and offering their services for free or whatever.
But when they had that discovery of all of those unmarked graves and camels and all of the First Nations and the schools across Canada not celebrated, but made them aware of what was happening, and they bought shoes to the different schools and the different areas. And an artist, we had shoes all on the front step, and an artist decided to paint all that. And it's a beautiful little painting. But all the proceeds for selling that painting, those prints, all go to us. So we gathered quite a number of sponsors that want to fund what the activities that we're doing. And there's probably still a lot more that we're going to be doing.
I have that painting in my office.
Do you?
I do, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing and all of the work
Not
that you're
finished
doing.
yet.
Lead. I'm not thanking you. I was gonna ask a question. So I'm aware that you were the chancellor of Algoma
Yeah.
University. We're a new university in Ontario. I wonder if you have any advice or thoughts for, you know, our institution, leadership and faculty, students.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I really was appreciative enough is that what it did, it opened the doorway to where the decisions of this school were being made.
Mhm.
And that was really important because we wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have the president that we have now. And we, at that time, during the time I was chancellor, we talked as children of Chingwak and say, we're not being taken seriously. We're not, things are not happening as quickly as we wanted to. And we were being lied to and about things that were supposed to be happening. So we got together and we said, no, we can't have this. So we worked very, very hard to bring that forward into the boardroom. And I spent many times explaining to the boardroom exactly what our position was here, what their obligation was here, and what were we going to do about it. You know, so that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about being as a chancellor. And it was, and I was visible. I went into the visibility of who I was important, and not who I was at Shirley, but who I represented as a former residential school student, a Native person, a woman. All of these things were in that chancellorship. Because Algoma didn't have the chancellor before. As a matter of fact, we were the ones in our position, were the ones that helped them get their charter.
Mhm.
So Algoma has a special mission here that's linked to that charter. So we were very instrumental in getting that for the university. When they take the stories and they're very interested in what we're doing here especially our little group, we're getting smaller and smaller now because, we're all getting old. A lot of people are passing away, but we're still here to continue that push forward. And as we move forward, it gets easier. I have to say it gets easier because you don't have to constantly be educating people. They're reading, they're seeing it on TV, they're seeing presentations, they're hearing of places that are being built and opened, for community sharing, so those things are all going to happen, and it's because of the initial movement of former residential school students.
We're concentrating now on recruiting second generation.
Yes.
Second and third generation. To keep this whole thing going. But they have to know why they're doing that.
And this whole campus is growing, despite the difficulty. And even some of the reluctance of people to become our partners and so on. It's developing because one of these days, all those barriers are going to be down and we'll have an exchange back and forth and with other areas that are doing what we're doing. They come to us now for advice. How are we going to do this? So we help them on that because we know experience all of the roadblocks and what constitutes success.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're sitting at the same table as curriculum development at this university. That's a huge one. And I'm so grateful for Osman, our president. How she, whenever we come up with an idea, she thinks it through and so on, but if it's viable, she supports it and moves it right through, which is wonderful.
We're working on decolonizing the university as well. Plus, we have a partner across the street, SKG, and they belong to the Shinwalk Education Trust. Of what they're doing in land-based activity, students. Which is awesome. We need to get back to that. Like Shirley was talking about how we used to live off the land. We ate good food and those kinds of things. So we're involved in so much, it's incredible.
It boggles my mind.
We have to check our calendars every day.
Like they're full.
Yeah.
Speak here, do this here.
And then we don't get paid for it. We do it for the most part on volunteer basis.
People are starting to give us honorariums now.
So it starts
But for a long time they didn't. And we just wouldn't stop. We just say, you gotta know this.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to see more changes within the curriculum to address all of the past, say in the political arena, conservancy of the land, learning about the forests, and all of this, protecting the waters and so on. So our role as First Nations is going to become so big, especially when we have food that has to do with the land. And like we've been working
There's an installation that's gonna be done at the end of this month in the auditorium that tells our story from the beginning through to now, present day. And I said, there's one thing missing. You're not talking about what happened with the people who were left behind, like the people at home, when the kids all left. Nobody's talking about that. And we need to do that. So I think they're gonna incorporate that in there.
Because a problem was the dysfunctionality of what was taking place on the reserve. Well, parents weren't parents. They took the children away. The grandparents weren't allowed to be grandparents. How could you be a grandparent when you didn't have any grandchildren there? And you know, so people started to use alcohol. The alcohol was the big one first, and later on it became drugs, and the dysfunction. So that's, that dysfunction grew and grew. So when the children are coming home, they're coming home to a dysfunctional community. So that's one of the things that we had to clear up as well if we were going to be successful as raising our own families and, changing your life and community of which you were a member. But like us, we didn't even have a central community. So we had that.
I never met her till I was 9 years old. Our families were all separated and spread out.
Yeah. So we've been working even longer than 81 because I became chief. You were my counselor for years, and so we're at the bit, literally dig the shovel in the ground and try to create a community that we finally have our community as a reserve. Well, 5 years ago? Yeah, 5 years ago. Over 25 years in negotiations with federal government.
They told us when they first started, you're not gonna get anywhere for about 20 years. And we said, oh, don't be silly, we'll be faster than that. It was 20 years.
Over 20 years, yeah. They weren't lying to us at that point.
We weren't listening.
Yeah, we didn't want that to be the case, but it was. And so now we're having to build this community now that we have it. And we have the compensation as well for that. So that can be used towards community building. So there's still a lot of work, but you can't get sick. You gotta be around. Have to continue our work, and we will continue the work that happens here.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for meeting us today, sharing, your stories and truth. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, I appreciate the fact that you're helping us in our. It's not jobs. For Jackie and I, it's become a way of life. It's just part of who we are now. Want to talk about residential? School, sit down. I'll tell you about, that kind of approach. But I'm feeling happier in my work now. I'm feeling effective.
People are listening.
Yes, people are listening. And if we have the years of people, we know we have that. Can tell the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I appreciate that opportunity. For me, it's always about the next step.
Yeah. Jackie, good luck with your challenges with the healthcare system.
Oh,
I hope that people listening can take it to heart and, appreciate their role in that. And,
well, if I didn't say anything, nothing would get done.
Yeah.
And that's what I encourage communities. People in the communities, don't put up with crap like that. Say something about it.
absolutely.
And this will help a lot. I'm sure, like with our recommendations in this as well, is that somebody can be thinking about that. Well, how are we going to do that? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? We have to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a good spot to end.
Thank you.
Thank
I want to thank you all for your attention and encourage you to, if you're in Sault Ste. Marie, visit the archives, visit the school. If you see Jackie or Shirley, thank them and sit down for some tea. As you heard the invitation from Shirley there, sit down, and listen. Really appreciate it. And, the rest of the agenda, I'm reminded of, our the strong, button pushers that we just heard from, and we have 3 more. So Chelsea Bezana is a 3rd-year medical student. When we started doing the Orange Shirt Day 4 years ago, it was really important that the sale of the shirts go to support learners. So we created what's called the Truth Award. And Chelsea is the first winner of that award. So Chelsea, I want to give you a few moments to reflect on what you've heard and take it away.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank the conference organizers and our speakers for giving context into the history and the legacy of residential schools. It's a really important discussion to have. As Joseph mentioned, my name is Chelsea and I am Indigenous. My ancestors are mainly from the Quebec and Ontario regions, so some have definitely been impacted by the residential schools. And as we've known and we've come to learn, they've undoubtedly caused multifaceted impacts on Indigenous people. And it's really important to shed light on these issues. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to be part of this discussion and to share my thoughts. So I wanted to begin by briefly chatting about what motivated me to pursue medicine. And the main factor for me is the fact that there is an instance of addictions and substance use in my family. And because it was so hard for us to find access to support and treatment, I decided that I wanted to help make a difference in the field and help be that pillar for change. So because of my life experiences, I definitely think that I come with a lot of empathy and understanding for some of the things that we're seeing. And through the years, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand what motivates people and what causes people to turn to substance, the impacts of addiction on behavior, what trauma and addiction does to the body and mind. And I think that that ties really well with what we're speaking about today. So if we think of the residential school survivors, they've suffered verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. They were beat, they were starved, impregnated, and, left in conditions with no emotional support, no love, no nurturing. And on top of that, they were dealing with the trauma of seeing people they loved, their friends, their siblings, go through the same thing. And luckily, some of them survived, despite never being given the things that, are seemingly essential for survival. Then they were asked to reintegrate themselves into society after having been through all of these things. They were deprived of love, of connection, of food supply, culture, and language. And they were never taught all of the things that they really need to survive and how to care for themselves, how to cater to their health, how to raise children, but they were taught violence and abuse and trauma. And as we saw from speaking with a lot of the courageous survivors, sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties here. As we saw from speaking with a lot of the courageous survivors, they have lived through a lot of trauma. And I think that this reflection of how these schools impacted their survivors is so important to understand the different layers that have caused intergenerational trauma. We know that the abuse and the mistreatment in these schools have caused a lasting impact on Indigenous people from one generation to the next. Current statistics show that Indigenous people have poorer mental health and physical health. There are higher rates of suicide attempts. There's more incidences of chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. They're more likely to suffer from depression, drug and alcohol abuse, and food insecurity. We tend to have lower educational outcomes and income levels in comparison with non-Indigenous Canadians. There are more children in foster care that are Indigenous, and there's a higher incidence of domestic violence in Indigenous homes. And all of these outcomes show that the effects of residential schools are still with us today. And for physicians and medical students, these aren't just statistics. This is the reality of our clinical practice. And even in my short time as a student, I've observed a lot of different challenges and situations that really highlight these health inequities. I spent some time this summer working in addictions medicine, and a lot of my patients were Indigenous, and oftentimes they would share their stories, and it often included parents with a history of substance misuse, issues with finding appropriate housing, even getting entangled with some wrong crowds because they were searching for friendships or an emotional connection. And that's the effects, essentially, of intergenerational trauma. There's sometimes an element of distrust amongst patients. They sometimes withhold information with fear of being judged or, prosecuted or being pulled away from their families. And recently, I actually had a patient become violent during an interview. And we're trained to build professional relationships with patients and to ask about social history. We often ask things like, where do you live and who all lives at home with you? Do you have children? Do you feel supported? But sometimes when I ask my patients these questions, they're afraid to answer. And when these situations take place, it really makes you take a step back and think, why did this happen? But when you think about the staggering statistics that I mentioned, it's no wonder that there's apprehension. And, I can't blame them for thinking that way and pushing back a little bit. And I think that we really need to think about the social factors that can influence a patient and the trust issues that can be triggered and the respect that can be so easily breached. And I think for many, including myself, talking about these issues and acknowledging the domino effects of the residential schools and providing an avenue for help and support, that's a really important step in healing. These critical reflections also lead us to think about the next steps. What can we do to break this cycle? NOSM really puts a huge emphasis on cultural safety in their teachings, and I think that's a really important pathway towards health equity for Indigenous people. In order to be considered culturally competent, physicians have to use the skills and strategies that put a focus on interventions that are culturally appropriate and interventions that tie with the beliefs of their patients. Physicians who practice cultural safety generally keep different perspectives in mind when providing treatment to patients, and they can use cultural background to propose plans that are patient-centered. And this allows quality and safety to be enhanced in medicine. Oftentimes, the health inequity in Indigenous populations is a result of unequal power relationships, unfair distribution of the social determinants of health, marginalization, biases, unexamined privilege, and even institutional racism. Physicians and medical professions have the ability to address some of these factors through education, training, organizational policy, and by attending conferences like we're having today. And in order to effectively integrate cultural safety into healthcare, it's important to understand the history, the colonial context, and the lived experiences of the Indigenous people. And we know that a lot of events, such as residential schools, have greatly impacted Indigenous health. And so we really do require a critical reflection. I think that incorporating traditional medicine and the medicine wheel, the grandfather teachings, into medical practice and treatment can really positively impact Indigenous health, and it allows care to be delivered in a way that's culturally appropriate. So I think that physicians should attempt to understand traditional medicine and respect its use in Indigenous populations. And I think we really need to understand the value in teachings that Indigenous people hold to a high regard. And this can help build mutual trust and understanding, and it can strengthen a therapeutic encounter. So when I interact with patients, I always consider treatments and plans that are based on medical grounds and principles, and the things that we've learned while studying medicine, but I also interact with the patient in a way that validates their experiences and in a way that puts their perspectives at the forefront of the appointment. And I think the fact that everybody's here today, we have a lot of medical students and physicians, I think that reveals that we're all willing to learn and grow and consider different perspectives. So I hope, if anything, today, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, helps others find empathy and understanding within themselves to create a movement that will better the lives of Indigenous people. It's crucial for us to all take a step back and really reflect. My job as a future physician is to make sure that I have the tools and the knowledge to provide the best care possible. And I think a lot of us with a bit of education and understanding have the ability to be that pillar for change. So I leave you with a word of encouragement to become culturally competent and provide care and communication that is empathetic and guided by Indigenous perspectives. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Our next panelist, Dr. Melanie Rose Frappier, is first-year resident in psychiatry and is in the room with Chelsea, I think.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. So ani bojo wasa nabe wawashkeshkwe nindigenakas nishwakmak nindonjiba. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Melanie Rose Frappier, and I'm a first-year psychiatry resident with the Nossum University at the North Bay site. I've lived in Northern Ontario my entire life, being born and raised in Sudbury. I also completed my undergraduate degree in Indigenous Studies at Laurentian University before continuing my education in medicine and finding a passion for mental health. In complete transparency, when I was asked to speak at the session here today, I had to consider whether or not I was the appropriate person for this panel. As a Métis Kwe, neither my family or I were directly impacted by residential schools. However, it did have an impact on us in a different way. In her youth, it was easy for my grandmother to hide her true identity for fear of consequences when it came to the acknowledgement of her Métis heritage. Because of this, traditions, language, and culture was lost. I remember as a child asking my parents what it meant to be Métis, and they could only answer me superficially because those core and fundamental teachings had never been passed down due to generations of fear and stigma. I took it upon myself to reach out to the community members and elders as a teenager, searching for who I truly was and where I came from. I felt as though I was stuck in the middle of two realities, never really fitting in. I was never white enough to be fully settler, and I was never Indigenous enough to be fully accepted among Indigenous peoples. Reflecting on those past and present feelings of inadequacy and confusion made me realize that I might have something to contribute to this panel after all. And even though my ancestors and loved ones weren't victims of residential schools, myself, my family, and others that have also lost parts of their identity due to colonization and Western ideology also deserve a voice when it comes to reconciliation. Recently, I've started a new step in my journey as a psychiatry resident, and I'm reminded once again that I find myself in the middle of two different ways of seeing. My mind is now devoted to a career within a Western institution, but my heart aches for traditional healing and wellness. To my core, I believe that health has a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual component, and they are all equally as important. Spirituality sometimes being forgotten or neglected in our current medical system. Throughout my medical education, I've heard the words cultural competency more times than I can remember. It's something as healthcare providers that we strive to offer, but sometimes I question whether or not we know what those words truly mean. I personally don't think that culturally competent care can be solely understood through training or education. Our individual culturally competent training doesn't end when we receive a certificate or a credit. I believe the most important aspect that is sometimes missed is having that one-on-one conversation with our patients. Each and every patient is different, which means that culturally competent care will vary on their expectations and their cultural needs, and only patients can comment on whether the care they received was competent or not. We must also be mindful of inappropriate or insufficient cultural training, as this could lead to increased harm and stereotypes if not done properly. This can be avoided by having a constant line of communication with Indigenous peoples about all topics that impact their care and communities. The Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action, published in 2015, offered very specific, very clear instructions, some which require a lot of work to be implemented still to this day. One in particular states, and I'll read it off here, it says, "We call upon those who can effect change within the Canadian healthcare system to recognize the value of Indigenous healing practices and use them in the treatment of Indigenous patients in collaboration with Indigenous healers and elders where requested by Indigenous patients." As healthcare providers, we not only have the authority but also the responsibility to implement these changes in our practice. As advocates, according to the CanMed rules, it's also our responsibility not only to increase our knowledge of Indigenous healing practices and treatments, but also respect that they can be equally as effective as our Western treatment options. As a hopeful future psychiatrist, I believe there is a role for traditional practices in mental health, and it could actually be the key for healing for many Indigenous patients. Throughout history, the federal government of Canada has made several attempts to eliminate Indigenous culture. Decades of oppression and discrimination through policies and laws such as the Indian Act, residential schools, and the 60s Scoop, to name a few, have resulted in intergenerational trauma, loss of culture, and connection to community. These colonizing policies effectively prohibited the use of traditional healing methods and broke cultural links. Due to this history, cultural knowledge and traditions have been lost, including teachings related to mental illness. It's important to preserve these cultural views and practices and weave together cultural and Western concepts of health in order to provide the best healing practices for Indigenous patients. So at the beginning, I introduced myself with my traditional name, which means dear woman who looks far ahead. And when reflecting on the future of psychiatry, I look ahead and I see cultural lodges found in every hospital across our country. Elders found in hospital and in community working in collaboration with healthcare professionals. Psychotherapy taking place in circles outside with traditional medicines or even in sweat lodges. Traditional perspectives of psychosis being respected and recognizing that some symptoms of mental illness can be perceived as gifts. I see patients reconnecting to the land, to themselves, and to spirituality. And I see healthcare professionals doing everything in their power to provide them this opportunity for healing without judgment. And that, to me, is one example of an attainable example of reconciliation. And I personally will be devoting my career and my energy towards making this vision a reality and working with my patients and with my community to offer the best individual care possible. As a medical community, we have made several positive steps in the past decades, but it's still not enough. More can and should be done. We need more than simple land acknowledgements or culturally competent modules, meetings with Indigenous communities without taking their feedback into account, empty words, campaigns, or promises. We need to do better, and this is only possible if we work together as a team. And when I say together, I mean physicians, other healthcare professionals, patients, elders, and community, all working together for the betterment not only of future generations, but for our current community members in need. I personally have faith in the NOSM University and their social accountability mandate, and I look forward to seeing some positive changes coming in the near future. If done properly, we as a university have the unique opportunity to showcase how powerful social accountability can be for our communities in Northern Ontario. But those changes can only be effective if we have the proper representation and include Indigenous peoples in our decision-making processes. So I'm going to finish this talk by saying that actions speak louder than words. And I'm going to ask every single one of you to reflect on this one last question. How will you contribute to this change? Thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Dr. Frappier. As Dr. Verma mentioned, we've created an anti-racist equity strategy, and a big part of that is around how we honor and support learners that express leadership. So we did initiate with the CIBC the Indigenous Medical Leadership Award. Dr. Frappier is one of the first winners, and I'm very proud to announce and introduce one of the second winners, which is Tara Wilson, who's a fourth-year medical student who's here with us in Thunder Bay. So I'll hand over to Tara.
All right, thank you. Miigwech, wachie, everyone. That's hello in Korea. I know probably we're mostly used to buju, but wachie. Mr. Chisel, or Lake Superior man, I just want to say miigwech, miigwech, miigwech for sharing your story and just all of your wisdom. And it was just really beautiful to hear how you have gone through and learned to heal through holistic medicine, and that's truly inspiring. And also miigwech to Jackie and Shirley, who are two Indigenous trailblazers. Their resiliency is very, very inspiring. I will echo Joseph in saying that probably one of my favorite lines from that was when Jackie said, "Don't put up with crap like that." But her story is very, very important to me, and it's stories like that that inspired my talk at the Cape conference this year when I spoke about reconciliation in emergency medicine, which is often the forefront or often the only time that Indigenous peoples will interact with our healthcare system. And it's those little interactions that leave such lasting impressions on our healthcare system as a whole. And congratulations to Chelsea on the Truth Award. I loved your chat around culturally competent care. And for Melanie, the part in your speech that really touched home with me was your talking about the importance of identity in reconciliation. So for those of you who don't know me, as mentioned, my name is Tara. I'm Omoshkego Cree from Long Lac, like 3 hours northeast of here, a little small town. So I grew up simultaneously in both Long Lac and Ottawa. My kukum is from a Cree village called Pegwa. It's just in the middle of the bush, right beside Constance Lake, which is why my band affiliation is Constance Lake First Nation. So, and my kukum's parents and family are predominantly from Fort Albany First Nation, which is in the James Braid. So yes, I am currently in my 4th year of medical school here at NOSM. And I am honored to be here today listening, learning, and reflecting with all of you. Oh, and I would like to relay just a bit of a trigger warning. I'm going to talk about some of my experiences with survivors, and I'm going to name specific abuses that have been well documented. So some of my stories of my interactions with residential school survivors, these have left a very stark impression on who I am as a person and will inform my practice. So the first one was when I was in my final placement of nursing school in Sioux Lookout. I was tending to this kind, funny, and most of all, very caring elder when a young Indigenous woman was brought into the emergency department by police for psychiatric evaluation. She was unwell, she was screaming, and she was fighting, and she needed to be restrained. The sound of her screams triggered a post-traumatic stress flashback in my patient, and I saw the terror in his eyes. He repeatedly begged me to go check on her and see if she was being hurt. I assured him that when people are brought in for psychiatric purposes, it's not to hurt them, but to assess, help, and keep them from hurting themselves. But that wasn't enough. And so, of course, I went over and I did see her being put in restraints, as was necessary at the time. She was not being abused or beaten, but no doubt that was a traumatizing time for her. Fortunately, it's why we have established leash restraint policies. And it's not a part of the job that anyone really appreciates or enjoys doing. So I went back in and I told him what was happening, and he settled, but with tears in his eyes, he said, I never wanted to hear that sound again. And he told me what I had already suspected, was that he went to residential school. He also told me how he's had experiences with police officers during a time when police brutality was acceptable. Another experience was recently when I was in Kenora. This other elder, who was known to frequent the ED for heavy intoxication, came in to be stabilized and receive care. So I recognized him because I had actually just met him out on the street in Kenora when I had brought him some food and water. So when I met him originally, I asked him why he was out on the street. He said that when he was discharged from the hospital, the road to Grassy Narrows had been washed out and he had nowhere to go. He had no phone and he was staying at the shelter for the past 10 days, and he spent every day out in the heat, no food, no water, besides, I suppose, what he could access at shelters. And so fortunately, I was able to contact their medical driver and I was able to get him back home. Part of me wondered, like, how long would he have just stayed out in the street had I not just approached him and asked him if he wanted like something to drink. So when I re-met him in Emerge, he recognized me, and then I did my assessment, and then I asked him, how long have you been drinking? And he knew I meant in his lifetime. He told me he's been drinking since he was 9 years old. All I could think to say was that, I'm sorry you felt you had to start drinking at such a young age. All he said was, yes, I went to residential school. I didn't know what else to do. I told him that my great kukam went to St. Anne's residential school. Sorry, I knew I was going to get emotional. Okay. And his eyes went wide. And he actually almost smiled a little bit as he asked, like in Fort Albany. And I was like, yeah, St. Anne's. I'm pretty sure there's only one. And he told me that's where he went to school. And I think that smile may have been due to a sense of sorry. I knew I was going to cry. I'm sorry. Okay, so I think that it may have been due to a sense of camaraderie and knowing that we had this common ground and that I had some connection to what he had been through. And so for those of you who don't know what St. Anne's Residential School is, it's one of the most infamous schools in existence. And it's notorious for its horrific violence and abuse. And he affirmed this as his smile quickly faded, as he started to stare off into space and said, that's where they had the electric chair. Yeah, thank you. I'll stay here with you. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, also while in Kenora, I met my dear friend Garnett. He's also an elder and he's a survivor of Indian residential schools. We would go for tea and we go grocery shopping. And at one time we walked the grounds of the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School. I could imagine that, well, he went to school in Lac Seul, that this was not an easy thing for him to do. He was reminded of the young girls in his class whose bellies would become so big and they couldn't understand it as children. He told me of this one girl whose belly was getting so big, and then she one day just disappeared and didn't show up to class anymore. And like many survivors, my friend turned to alcohol to numb his pain. But he was further along in his healing journey because he had found a relationship with Creator and knew he couldn't continue the way he was going. And so as we looked across the lands, he said how he feels there are children buried along the edges of the marsh of the school where we were walking by. These are 3 different lives sharing very similar experiences with different outcomes, but united as resilient survivors who are worthy to be honored and treated with dignity, respect, and love. So with that said, I have many thoughts and emotions when I think about reconciliation. So I actually had to rewrite this speech literally this morning because my first one was driven by the absolute rage and hate I felt towards Canada as a whole for the vile abuses our people endured. So I had to look up the definition of reconcile, and some of Merriam-Webster's definitions of reconcile include to restore to friendship or harmony and to settle or resolve. The first definition implies that there was friendship or harmony prior to the introduction of the Indian Act. This infers that there was friendship in a society that was based on a pervasive idea that Indigenous persons are savages, less than, and surmountable obstacles to conquering and colonizing lands. Any harmony was based on manipulation and false pretenses. I thought, how can we possibly reconcile the stealing, the raping, sodomizing, impregnating, beating, murdering and burying, electrocuting, burning, and the mental and spiritual torment of children, the effects of which ripple through society today? So in truth, I don't want to restore relations to historical settings, and we cannot resolve what has occurred. However, we can work to resolving its ramifications. And we can hear the truth, we can know the truth, and introduce justice to survivors and their descendants by way of action, by social accountability, by continuing to come together as we are today, in unity, saying we see you, we believe you, and we stand with you in solidarity. Promising that as a nation, we will do better for you, and with you from nations to nations. Canada can no longer be ignorant to the traumas it has caused, and it will no longer be. And that's what reconciliation is to me. And so for survivors, I was not there and I do not know firsthand what you've been through, but I know trauma and I know hurt, and it's a part of the human condition, and you are not alone. I have family members who have lost their lives as they turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms in dealing with the intergenerational traumas of Indian residential schools. You've been hurt and you didn't deserve it, and it was not your fault. Life was not meant to be like that, and it should never have happened. I believe that when people are hurt from a place of such passionate hate that they often absorb that hate. They must then reconcile that hate that was placed on them in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's by hurting themselves or displacing it onto others. But this does not dissolve the hate, it magnifies it and spreads it. My friend Garnett is an example of the power of forgiveness. And so I urge every one of us to forgive. Maybe deep down you blame yourself for what's happened to you, or maybe your hurt caused you to hurt other people. Forgive yourself. Maybe you were that family member that was hurt by misplaced hurt. Forgive them. Maybe you subconsciously blame your parents or siblings for letting you be stolen. Forgive them and forgive yourself. Maybe you were alive while residential schools were in operation and you didn't speak out to end them. Forgive yourself. Maybe you have met loved ones and friends who suffered the abuses we're recognizing today, and you have a deep hatred for the institutions that caused this for over a century. Still forgive. Hate has operated for too long in this country, and it is too big of a burden to carry. It kills and it destroys. Forgiveness does not mean that we forget or that we don't hold people and institutions accountable. It just means that we no longer let the hurt and the hate control us. We need to forgive in order to move forward in social accountability, in nationhood, and in reconciliation. And in contrast to hate, love operates in a similar but a far more powerful way. Love is one of the principles of the 7 grandfather teachings. Love yourself and love one another. It takes another principle, bravery, to love. And I believe it's the only way to truly honor our stolen children. Miigwech.
I know that was hard. Miigwech. You okay?
Yeah.
You're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Jimmy Rich, Tara, and thank you to the other speakers. I want to thank everybody who came today and everybody who spoke today for their bravery. And I don't know what more to say, Tara, than, carry forward that love and that message. And I appreciate your attention today. So, Jimmy Gretsch, thank you.